it almost creates an additional anxiety. It is one of those things where you balance is no longer within your reach because you're constantly trying to do 100% and it's not attainable long term.
Einstein also said, all that is important may not be able to be measured, and all that can be measured may not be important. And so I find those to be interesting contributions to this process.
It was one of those things where I'm like, holy crap, it ran my life. And it was, looking back, it was obsessive, and it was not what I do today. I have a lot more flexibility, and I am healthier than ever.
I have not found a skill that benefits me or my family more than...
Good morning. Today we're talking about such a topic that I messed up and I fell into that trap, which is when health tracking pretty much stops helping you but starts running your life. I wonder, did you ever fall into that trap?
No, I don't think I did. And I'll tell you why, Klaudia, is my introduction to wearables came with my work that I did at Polar. That's where I got started. And literally, I think probably one of my early Polar heart rate monitors was probably the first wearable I ever had. And I don't think wearables aren't generating scores saying, hey, you're fit, you're not fit, you're doing, heart rate monitors don't do that. They tell you what your heart rate is. And so I don't think I got drugged down that rabbit hole quite as bad. But I do self-track a ton. And what I'm starting to find is now that I have several years of data, I'm going back and making decisions not based on how did I sleep last night, but what's going on in the last month. What's my change in location? What's my change in diet? What's my change in behavior? These kinds of things. So the decisions are being made over a lot bigger horizon, which I think helps a little bit.
I think that's where I'm at right now, where I have a lot more flexibility around the data that I see. As much as I see it on a day-to-day basis, I don't make, per se, strict decisions based on that on a day-to-day basis. I rather look at the picture as a whole, like a bird's eye view to see what changed over a course of a month, over a course of 2 months. And you sent me this article about the self-quantification trap, how I think a lot of people who start out in the industry, especially who are these hardcore biohackers, or even those who are just getting their feet wet in this world of self-quantification, they fall into this obsession with constantly tracking and wanting to achieve the perfect score, which promises us control and self-awareness. But I think at the end of the day, and from what I've heard from other people who have been in biohacking for a long time, is that it feels overwhelming. It almost creates an additional anxiety. It is one of those things where balance is no longer within your reach because you're constantly trying to do 100%, and it's not attainable long term.
No.
So I think at the beginning, a lot of people fall into this trap, including me. And I can't really tell you how long it took me to adjust and tone it down into what is manageable long term. But we've heard this term, what gets measured gets managed, but so many times what happens when what gets measured gets mismanaged. And I wonder, how would you address that?
Well, I'm trying to remember the person who said measured, and I'll think about it here in a minute, but Einstein also said, all that is important may not be able to be measured, and all that can be measured may not be important. And so I find those to be interesting contributions to this process. What's interesting, Klaudia, I will bet, I'm trying to think about this, but I have been wearing a wireless heart rate monitor for probably close to 30 years. So I can go back somewhere either on a computer hard drive or on a file out there in the cloud, and I have a record of every workout I've done for the last 30 years because I've had a heart rate monitor on for it. And now there's a good and a bad to that. When we first started, it was funny because when we were working for Polar, we would we'd be out on a trip somewhere, a show somewhere, and you would have forgotten to throw your transmitter in. Most of us wore our monitors as a watch. But if you didn't throw your transmitter in, you're looking at your partners that you work with, and it's like, I forgot my transmitter, I can't work out. Um, and you need to immediately get past that. Um,
Yes.
or you don't forget your monitor. But there's a truth to it. It's like, okay, I want that feedback. It's that valuable. Okay, that's what's important. It's that valuable. Now, if I don't have my Aura ring, do I not sleep? Well, no, you still sleep. You still have to do those things. But it just changes the routine. It changes the process. And I think you learn to listen. When you first start driving your car, you're obsessed with your speed, right? You're paying a lot of attention. You're following it very closely. But after you've been driving your car for a while, you kind of just look down and it's a reference after a while. And as I've said many times on the podcast, you don't look at it until there's flashing lights in your rearview mirror. Um, but
Hope
but I
not.
think, well, that's usually when you really look. Um, but um, but yeah, the self-quantification movement is interesting, even with its flaws. I think it's critical. I think it's a very important. We'll talk more about this as we go, but even with its flaws, still very important.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned it because it prefaces what we want to talk about, how you can really bring in balance with those tracking because it's not either or. You don't have to like not track at all or track
Right.
everything. There is a very healthy middle, which I still believe takes time to find. Like I have not met a person who didn't do go too far or didn't do anything at all right at the get-go. Like if somebody starts tracking, they tend to go all in, and then over time they start to learn how they can pull back and what are some of the things that they don't have to look at on a daily basis. I mean, personally, that's what happened to me, and it's interesting because when I first started tracking calories,
Hmm.
that's when I first started to like, okay, I need to dial in my diet, and I was obsessed with, using MyFitnessPal and taking pictures of every label that I had at the house that I was cooking and measuring out my chicken, my rice, my etc. And it was just, at first, it felt like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing and what's going into my body. Little did I know that I ate too much to begin with because I was on the 6 meal a day diet and hoping to lose weight. Did not happen. But
You're
it was
building
very
muscle like
interesting.
you're building muscle like crazy, weren't you?
I guess I was trying, but I kept feeling bulky. My body was not happy with that consistently elevated blood sugar.
Hmm.
It was just it didn't like it because I think at the time it was before I started to fast and do intermittent fasting. So I think I definitely had insulin resistance to a degree. So insulin would go down really, really slow, and here I am 3 hours later already pumping in another loads of calories. So my insulin never had a break. And only after I introduced intermittent fasting, when I started to learn that, okay, my body is still fine without calories. And then again, and then I fell into the trap of tracking to the minute the 12-hour or 16-hour window. Like, okay, is it noon yet? It's 8 o'clock? I can't. So it was one of those things where I'm like, holy crap, it ran my life. And it was looking back, it was obsessive and it was not what I do today. I have a lot more
No.
flexibility and I am healthier than ever.
Yeah. And I think this is what listen, anytime you're learning something new, you become obsessive about it. That's the cool thing about learning, and we
Yes.
dive headspace and there's nothing like a new expert, someone who just learns the term and they're telling everybody about it. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
welcome to the party, pal. Um but um but yeah, and I think that's important. Listen, it's always good to learn. It's always good to measure food. It's always good to pay attention. But there are things there are things that, again, Klaudia, I think you're probably better off throwing your scale away than you are using it every day. You know, there's a good and a bad. Now, some people use it very effectively. Some people use it very negatively. And I think if you look at who uses it the most, the best, is probably you probably get better off throwing the scale away. I do know, you know, I'll tell you a story. When we put our human performance lab in at Columbus State, this has now been 35 years ago. So, you know, the director of the department comes to me and says, "Hey, here's a budget. I forget what it was. It was like $70,000. He said, we're going to put together a lab. Because at the time, we're carrying stuff around from classrooms. We had sit and reach boxes and skin fold calipers and blood pressure cups that we carried around classroom to classroom. So we put this in. I order an underwater weighing tank, and we have treadmills and VO2 tests and all the good stuff. But I put a scale in. I ordered a scale, and I put it in. It's a classic doctor scale. And I put it in, and I had a student, and I am so thankful that she did this. She walked up to me and she says, "I want you to know something. Every time I walk in and I see that thing, I have a fear response." And I was like, wow. And I'm an old wrestler. Okay. We were on a scale twice a day, every day for 10 years. Okay. And so, you know, this is when you start to learn about disordered eating, eating disorders, fear responses, things like that. So you start to understand the psychology of this, and this is one of the things that I consider so important. My college training is in physiology, understanding the physiology of movement. But what I've learned is that I can't get people to do things differently unless I change the way they think about it. I have to understand the psychology. And so whether it's a scale, most blood pressures measured in a doctor's office are not accurate. Okay. Because most people have what's called white coat syndrome. Okay, they come in, you're sitting in the doctor's office, you're having a sympathetic response. I mean, because most people just go to the doctor's office when they're ill. They're worried about what they're going to find out. So when you go to the doctor's office and they put you on a scale and they measure your blood pressure, well, there's two measurements that are pretty much shit measurements. Um, if you go to your doctor and you have a record of this over time, whether it's weight, blood pressure, HRV, blood sugars, regardless, we are now removing the stimulus of the physician's office visit, and we're dealing with real data. And that's the beauty of quantified self, is that we now have the ability to. My wife bought a bioelectrical impedance scale. Um, because we now have really good 4-point scales. It measures bioelectrical impedance both in the feet and the hands. So it's upper, and these are good consumable devices. These are pretty good pieces. And I'm like, okay, I like that. That's a good. And we spent a little bit more to get the one it's not the cheapest, but it's been a really good tool. So quantified self, this, and I think you just said it a little bit ago, it's not about last night and today. It's about a process and being able to have data over time. The same way, if you get a big check from work and you put it in the bank, that's great. You had a big check in the bank today, but your expenses go over time. You need to look over it over a period of time and say, are my deposits matching my withdrawals? Same thing with quantified self. Are my deposits that I'm making in work counteracting the withdrawals of the environment? And I think this is a mindset that you have to develop along the way.
I just want to piggyback off that because you said something that just really triggered this thought in my head about the mindset, how as our environment is constantly against us, like we talk about it all the time, we forget, maybe forget is not the correct word, but we definitely stop relying and don't know how to tune into our intuition. Mm-hmm. Because there are a lot of triggers and we're just constantly reacting.
Right.
What self-quantification, I think, allows us to do at the very beginning is become more self-aware of our body and
Hmm.
start to connect the dots that my environment is this, and this is how my body responds to it. And what are
Hmm.
some of the things I can control and tweak and optimize to feel better? And I think it's a process where once you go from using your intuition not at all to then having so much data, you're just constantly looking at data. I think there needs to be an additional graduation into, okay, now I can start to learn how these things impact my physiology, psychology, and learn to tune back into your intuition a little bit more and have the data as something overarchingly that you look at how you're doing, but it's not running your life, but you're a little bit more in tune with your body. And that's how I see my process and graduation from having no clue to being obsessive to now having balance and looking at progress over time instead of constantly reaching for that perfect score.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think there is that value in you should start tracking and journaling. You should start looking at all different data points to know where you are. And we talk about this all the time because otherwise you just go around clueless, guessing that what you're doing is good and hoping that you're not just reacting to your environment, but your body is actually growing from it. So I want to go into a little bit about what self-quantified movement is to explain to our audience. And I'm sure because you've been in this world for so long, you've probably seen the evolution in what we've used to quantify our physiology, our psychology. Would you share a little bit?
Yeah, the sensor technology is improving immensely. And so I go back to when I was teaching exercise physiology back 35 years ago. Claudia, we would tell you to measure your heart rate by taking your two fingers, placing it on your carotid artery, and and then the debate was, do you measure for 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds? So we're talking about error rate as it changed from the four different levels. To I have this invitation to go work for Polar, and I see this thing called a wireless heart rate monitor, and I put this strap on, and not only am I getting a very accurate heart rate, but I'm getting it every minute of my workout. So I'm starting to see buckets of am I zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? How long am I in each? And it was game changing. So I went from teaching this to this is bullshit, frankly, because we now have devices that are less expensive than our shoes. I've paid more for a belt than I've paid for a heart rate monitor. Okay. That's how accessible these things are now. Okay.
What kind of belt is that?
It was a nice leather belt. Okay. Don't get me wrong. It was a nice leather belt. Um, and it was not designer. Okay. So we're not even going there. Um, but, um, but but yeah, they're accessible now. And if you're going to get into it, yeah, we've got these great pieces of technology, wearable technology, but it's also evolved, Claudia. This is the beauty, and we can put a link in the show notes. But I did a webinar for our friends at Heads Up Health about a month ago. We were talking about integrating HRV into a medical practice, and the vagal nerve and all the things that it tunes and all the work that we do. um that was not realistic 30 years ago. It was, you know what, we were measuring HRV in a team 10 years ago. So it was a decade ago that I was using technology, and the Aura Ring was just coming out in version 1 back then. Okay. So we were comparing Aura Ring data to other wearable data in 2015, 2016 to say, oh, is this ring worthwhile? And oh, by the way, it was very good. Um, so, this is relatively new. Now, as far as wearables go, the Japanese were using pedometers back in the late 60s. Okay, and this is where the concept of 10,000 steps came from. It was from some of those early Japanese researchers. So we were using pedometers. We were using pedometers in school physical education programs 30 years ago. But we've slowly seen this evolve to the point to where, now, I mean, our Aura rings, they cost $300-400, but you can now buy analogs that are pretty accurate for under 200. And they're pretty good. You can buy heart rate monitors for under $100. Um, and this is so the technology's evolving. We're just starting to learn about all the things we can do with it. What are the positives? But we also have to recognize that, okay, we can have some obsessives here, and we got to make sure and deal with them as well.
How do we deal with those? How do we even recognize it? It's not written on the box that, hey, beware.
No, well, I think if someone's listening, okay, this is your and I's opportunity that hopefully someone's listening. Um, if you feel, listen, if this is creating anxiety and not creating peace, okay. I pulled up a note here just a second ago that I wanted to go back and look at, and I'm doing a training right now in polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory is looking at the vagal nerve, and we think of the vagal nerve in a binary sense, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Well, it's actually a graduation across the board. And in this training, they talk about what's called circuits. What circuit are you triggering based on your vagal status? So if a lion walks through the door, you're triggering a fear circuit. Um, if you're feeling good about something that you did, and it's probably a co-engagement of both sympathetic, parasympathetic, you're going to go into a flow state, which is a really good place to be. That's a good place to be, and actually has a very powerful reward circuit. So fear circuit, reward circuit. Finally, when we are very parasympathetic, we are in an empathetic social circuit. Okay. So what I would suggest is that one of the things we teach to improve HRV is things like meditation, deep breathing, all these tools to improve Well, that's also building bandwidth to make us more social. It's building bandwidth to improve our empathy circuit. Help feeling the feeling. And listen, I think that's something the world's struggling with right now. I don't think there's near enough empathy. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day. You and I were talking a little bit as we started recording. There's a documentary that released about a month ago that's called Surviving Ohio State, and it's about a team doctor that we had there, and I'm actually in the credits of this movie, so I helped participate in the making of it. But we had a team doctor that was molesting athletes. And it was bad. And the universe, and there's all kinds of issues that go with it. But I was talking to somebody about it, and the guy's name was Richard Strauss, and Richard Strauss wrote one of my letters of recommendation to grad school. Okay, so we had a really close relationship. Now we come to find out, guy was a pretty good groomer. I did not happen to react to the grooming, but and someone's like, "Don't you hate him?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, he's dead. He took his own life, so he's tortured that much. He took his own life." I said, "But you have to remember this." And I'm not sure I could have made this statement before I really understood HRV and counseling and empathy and these things. But I said, most sexual abusers were abused themselves. Okay. So when I see someone like Richard Strauss, there, I am not for a minute suggesting what he did was acceptable. It was totally unacceptable. And there needs to be a resolution made to the people that he hurt. But I also know this guy was probably molested himself. And this is how that circuit works. So I have learned with good counseling, a lot of good counseling, how to take a step back. I understand the HRV continuum, that I know when my HRV is high, I have bandwidth. I have the ability to be more social. I have the ability to express empathetic understanding. And and at the end of the day, man, I'll tell you, quantified self, I think empathy and social connection may be a little more important than VO2. Um, but you know, it's important to pull these things together and keep it real.
Yes, I love how you navigated into what are some of the things that are more important because I think in this world of biohacking, now I'm seeing it come to the forefront in terms of how the simplest things will have the biggest impact. But if you are hung up on numbers for a long time, and you're totally for and trying to out supplement an unhealthy sleep schedule, an unhealthy diet, a lack of movement, being in isolation, your physiology, psychology will never be at a healthy, optimal state because you will never be able to out supplement
It'll struggle.
or,
Some people
yes,
may be able to
it'll
get there,
definitely struggle
but most of us will struggle.
because these are so primal to us. And when we have our primal needs dialed in, then we can stack things on top of it to be these often called in the self-quantification movement the superhuman that we can be. But tracking can be distractive from these basics and push you to pay attention to perhaps the wrong things or try to pull the wrong levers if perhaps you don't have guidance, if you're doing it all by yourself. And I think coaching is one thing that anybody who's a novice in tracking should have in their life, or at least self-educate through podcasts like ours, or
Yeah.
there are so many out there.
You know what's funny about that last statement that you made? So before we started recording today, we were talking about our weekend, and Klaudia had spent the weekend out in Las Vegas at a UFC event, and we were talking about, you know, our experiences with UFC. And again, you know, UFC is about punching people in the face. Okay, it's about as aggressive as it gets. Um, but I'm an old wrestler. I mean, I love engaging in the challenge. And when I would wrestle someone, while there was a lot on the line, when I walked off the mat, I could shake their hand and say thanks and honor their commitment to what they did for me that day, regardless of win or loss. Now, if I lost, I was disappointed. If I won, I felt good. But what we know, and so let's take this back, and I realize when all you've got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is not the situation here. But when you look at HRV, for instance, when you look at the internal status of your nervous system, particularly your autonomic nervous system, it runs the scale -10 to +10. 0 is your asymptomatic. -1, you're starting to develop symptoms of dis-ease. +1, you're improving your performance, and so on. So you run a range there. And oh, by the way, it's interesting how HRV runs that spectrum too and gives you a tool there. So the point I want to go back to, so whether you're preparing to punch people in the face repeatedly, or whether you're preparing to be a good boss and motivate your team, punching people in the face is not a good way to motivate your team. Okay, it gets you a trip to HR and you lose your job. Um, but empathy, understanding where these people come from, helping them understand, helping them improve their skills. I can help someone improve skills of kicking and hitting and fighting, or I can help someone with skills on search optimization, context development, data management. These are both skills. Okay. both of them can be overwhelming. Some of them, if your skills are low and you introduce this new concept of managing a couple million data sets, can be overwhelming. But when you teach them the tools, you teach them the skills to use this to manage the data, all of a sudden it empowers. You become powerful. And so as a leader, as a teacher, it's critical that I am empathic from the standpoint, Klaudia, in my 63 years of life, I have not found a skill that benefits me or my family more than empathy. Okay, it is the skill. Now, sometimes it's hard to get there. Sometimes there's challenges. Sometimes the bank does not agree with my goals, okay? And it creates stress. And sometimes, you know, but you have to be able to take a breath, take a step back, control the controllables. You know, we've talked about this in the whole stress response, okay? But having the bandwidth so that I'm doing my best to drive my social and my empathetic connection system more than my fear system.
Well said.
Well,
Everybody could benefit from a little bit more empathy nowadays.
it's
It's
yeah,
just,
it's there's a lot of people hating going on, and it just bugs me.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
it's,
I understand. You know, I had a really good friend. He was a psychologist. His name was Dr. Mike Thompson. We lost Mike a few years ago. And one of the things he said to me that really struck home, he says, "You have control over nothing." No, he said, then he stopped me say, "You have control over one thing. You have control over yourself. You have control over what you do." So if you think controlling another human is your problem, that's where it starts. I have influence over other humans. I have I have influence over people in my household. I have influence over my daughter, more so early on, less so. I mean, she's now a grown adult, but I still have influence. I've never had control, never. Okay, and it's recognizing that I can't control every situation. Listen, I can have a great diet, I can be exercising, I can be sleeping, but I don't have control whether some guy walking in the airport next to me is carrying a virus. Um, and it happens to land and get translated, and my immune system's got to go into play. Um, I have control over behaviors prior to that because they're my
yep.
behaviors, but I don't have control over everything else. I got control over this. I got influence over other things. Control the controllables. Okay, everything else is influence.
Yeah, you have control over how you set up your body to respond to any given situation that you don't have control over. So let's say that virus example. You don't have control over that the person next to you has a virus that you're
Yeah,
now exposed to, but you've had control over how strong have you built up your immune system to respond to that viral exposure and react in a way that is not going to wreck you, hopefully.
yeah,
So it's what we often talk about with 90% healthy is that we want people to build up the resilience to be able to respond to their environment in a way that isn't gonna wreck them, that isn't gonna burn them out, isn't gonna make them feel out of power,
yeah.
but can
Powerless.
actually, yes, powerless. So I think it's a wonderful point, and I wanted to go back a little bit. You mentioned the UFC fight, my first UFC fight. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to. And it was wonderful to see the art that goes into it and how those athletes train months upon months and years upon years. And some of the big ones would only fight, twice a year, I found out. And it is crazy. I attended one of a roundtable where one of the fighters talked about because in this UFC, it's the best fighters are fighting against the best fighters in the world. So you're not trying to change things to become 25% and 50% better than what you are now. You just want to get those 1% small changes
Or
to
less.
make the difference. And
Yeah.
and get that knockout and win. And honestly, I felt like, oh my God, this is exactly what we talk about here, because that can be brought back down to the everyday person's level. You're not trying to change things overnight or within a week even to be 25% different. You want to do those 1% changes that can consistently make a difference and build you up to be better over time and win, not a fight, but win in life. And as much as these UFC fighters, obviously they track a lot of things and all the small things matter in their environment. So they're optimizing everything in their environment. But I was talking to Michael Chandler, one of the UFC fighters, and he said, as much as, yes, all of these, the diet, the nutrition, the stress management matter, now he's optimizing his social circle because he wants to spend time with people who add to his life, who fuel him instead of people who take away from him. So the community that we surround ourselves in is also so powerful, and we have zero control over how people around us behave, but we have control over who we actually spend time with. And it's not necessarily measurable. I mean, sometimes you can see on your HRV that you spent a week with your family and all of a sudden you're more parasympathetic and perhaps your HRV is higher, but
Oh no,
it
no,
doesn't always is clear
it's the other
cut.
way. It's the other way, Claudia. Time with family takes away. Okay, so let's be clear on that. Um, yeah,
For some, it might.
no, well, I have some very clear data on this. When we worked with the wrestling team back in 16 and 17, we would have these guys all fall. We'd be training them up. We'd send them home for Christmas, thinking it was a recovery trip. Okay, thinking we're giving a break, and the guys would come back first day. So it was either right around New Year's, either right before or right after. And we had this one workup for the day they came back. We were planning on just running them in the ground. Okay, because it was getting ready to start competitive season. I had very few opportunities for good deep dives like we had done previously. Well, the team comes back. I got the worst HRV scores for the entire season, for the entire year. And so I get these scores back and I go to the coach. I go, we cannot do the workout that we had planned. He goes, what should we do? I said, we should drill light work. Let's get these guys in. Let's get a sweat going. Let's get them home. Let's get them back in their routine. Next day, boom, HRVs took off. They just popped. Okay. So what did we learn? Family stress is the worst stress. Okay. There's no two ways about it.
Actually, I do have a story about that. I remember just a few years ago when I was still living in LA, my dad came to visit me for a whole month. I have never really spent that much time with my dad, just the two of us. And we definitely had some issues to work out. And you could clearly see in my data that month was my body took a hit.
Yeah.
My nervous system took a hit. I kept going back, and that was the first time I actually saw how social stress can impact physiological biometrics, and it just blew my mind. Ever since then, we're fine and everything's great,
Yep.
but that
Yep.
month was brutal on my nervous system.
That's training. It may be emotional family
Yeah.
training, developing the skills along the way. We pick these up as we go, but that's just, and again, that's the reason I really love this polyvagal concept of fear circuit, reward circuit, empathy, social circuit. That the behaviors are going to either feed or influence one of those, and the arrows point both directions. Okay. So as we have challenges, we use resources, we utilize our autonomic nervous system. It pays a price and we see a drop in our numbers, but then with good behaviors, we'll get them back. We get stronger. We learn to manage the relationship better. So yeah, there's no doubt that is part of it.
Manage the relationship better and put up boundaries,
Well, that may be your
which I
management
learned.
tool. Um, and that's a very important one. I don't want to minimize that at all.
Healthy
Um,
boundaries.
oh, that listen. I've said it many times. There'd be something going on. I look at Lord. I'm like, listen, let's just hook up and go across the country. I really don't want to deal with this. And since I don't have to stay here, let's go. Um, so,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's how you management's done a lot of different ways. So yeah, no doubt. But let's go back to this. all of these inputs, positive and negative, have an impact on this self-actualization, both positive and negative. And Klaudia, I think let's go back to our original thesis statement of are people becoming obsessive with this. People don't get into this for no reason at all. Okay, there's usually something that pulls something into the space. If you're coming into it from an athletic standpoint, it's usually a positive goal you're working towards. But there's a lot of people that are just tired of feeling like shit, feeling bad, and they just want to change in their life. So they begin to explore this and they can work their way through it. But yeah, this is I don't think there's any doubt that it's valuable. The value of this is far greater than any of the hassles that come with it. But in life, you have to manage both of those.
Yes, and that's a perfect segue into talking about how self-tracking and self-quantification and data can actually help, because there are times in your life, there are seasons when it can really be beneficial and help guide you through a certain phase of your life. Certain instances, it could save your life. So there are
Mm-hmm.
so many different ways that the data can be needed and useful and point you to the right direction.
Yeah,
And I
utilize
want
to
to
make a
talk
good
about that
decision.
as
Yes.
we come to, yes. What are some of the ways that you see it being a good use case?
Let me tell you a funny story. So my wife just started working a new job. She's a personal shopper at a big grocery store. Um, and so she goes and works 3 to 4 days a week, usually about 8 hours a day. So right now she's walking about 5.5 to 6 miles a day with this job. Okay. And this was kind of a surprise. Now, we've had to change shoes because she started to get some overuse in her feet from this. So we've gotten that fixed. So I've had to treat her like an athlete. But we went shopping the other day and she pulled a pair of shorts off the shelf that is two pant size smaller than what she was wearing, and now in the smallest pant size she's been in probably the last decade. She's very happy about that. What's going on? She's walking a marathon a week. Um, and that'll have an impact. Oh, by the way, she's also upgraded her protein intake. Okay, she's really and oh, the nice byproduct is her HRV is slowly moving up too. Her bases are now what used to be her peaks are now her bases. So we're
That's
seeing this.
awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. What happened? Major change in environment. She decided she wanted to do this work. She got the job, and she loves it. They called to go in for an extra hour. They work, and she just rockets out of here. She loves it. It's feeding her emotionally. It's feeding her socially. It's feeding her physically. So we are able to use quantifiable data. Her Apple Watch tells her how many steps she takes. Her Apple Watch also tells her what her heart rate is at work. So she can start to see, okay, I see a shift up. A third of her day, most days of the week now, has shifted up dramatically from being home. Um, and we can measure that. And did we have to wait for the HRV to improve to be able to say I can go do the job? No. You go do the job, you go do the work, but then you see the benefit that comes with it and you're able to quantify it, which is really pretty cool.
That is really cool. But also, she's not relying on that. Oh, or she's not being discouraged if her HRV drops, or
No.
she's not like, oh, this is not working anymore if she's walking less than 5 miles. So it's one of those things where you see the change and it's exciting, but you're not emotionally attached to it. That if it doesn't show the same exciting result 2 weeks down the road, you're not going to get discouraged, but you're going to keep going because over time it is actually making an impact.
Yeah. And you know what? And maybe we should do a episode on this, but I've got something that I do called the athlete performance pyramid. It's the three pillars that drive athletic performance: physiology, psychology, and skills. And I'm writing a workbook right now for this. And on the physiological side, there's four elements that I look at. Number one is movement quality. Do you move well? Because if you don't move, and the second is strength. The problem is someone who doesn't move well begins to engage in strength training, and all they do is strengthen bad movement, okay, which is not beneficial. So fix your movement. You usually do it with strength, so that comes hand in hand. You build energy on top of that, so that's what we typically refer to as cardiovascular training, but it's energy training. And then finally, the top of the pyramid is resiliency or recovery. Those are the four physiological aspects that we work with. You change those. Then you have psychology and skills to go with this. And this model can apply to anybody, whether it's a parent or a worker or someone like that. But that's the beauty of quantifying. Yes, you want to be able to do a move. You want to listen, there's simple little movement tests. Can you sit down and stand up without using your arms to stabilize yourself? Okay, that's an important thing to do for someone. Now, for an elite athlete, yeah, they do that 1,000 times. Okay, we have to have more refined tools depending on the extreme that we're going to. Strength. Do I think? I don't. There are strength exercises that are used traditionally that I think, frankly, are bullshit. That there's very few people benefit from having a better bench press. Everybody benefits from being stronger, but bench press is not one of the KPIs we pay attention to. There's other tools that we can use. Cardiovascular fitness. VO2 is nice. I prefer power at threshold. That's my tool. How many, what's the wattage per heartbeat? That's a really valuable tool. And then at the top of that triangle is resiliency. Resiliency, we see that with HRV. That's where that starts to come into play. So on all of those physiological skills, we've got nice little assessments that we can do, either basic or they can become more advanced as our levels increase over time. I do a more advanced assessment of cardiovascular fitness for an athlete that's training for the Olympics than I do for an athlete that's just starting a sport. I don't do a VO2 test on a kid who's just learning to wrestle or learning to play lacrosse or learning, because they're more skill centric than we are physiological centric. But my point is, in life, we now have some pretty cool, quantifiable, quality wearable. Not all wearables are good. Let's be clear about that. We're not going to talk about the ones we don't like on this show, but we'll talk about the ones that we do like. I love Oura Ring. I think it's an excellent product. I love heart rate monitors of all flavors. Okay. Heart rate's a much easier tool to quantify than HRV. One's measuring in seconds, the other one's measuring in milliseconds, and it makes a big difference. But it all goes back to the more data you have, the better decisions you can make. But we've got to keep our eye on the prize. The eye, you know what? I don't ever expect to have a tombstone, but I never want my tombstone to say this guy died with a resting heart HRV of 70 milliseconds. That doesn't need to be on my tombstone. When someone talks about me, I want them to talk about I'm a good dad, I'm a good husband, I'm a good teacher, I'm a good friend. That's what I want people to remember me for. What I do know is I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband, I'm a better teacher, and I'm a better friend when I'm more physically fit, when I have a lot of resiliency, when I have a lot of the resources so I can display empathy, so I can display social connection. And I can, at the end of the day, help people make better decisions to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. That's my personal mission. And I know I get there when I use data correctly.
That's such a good point because when I talk to a lot of people who are in this world of biohacking, health optimization, whether they are an athlete or not an athlete, one thing they all agree with when they have their life and health choices dialed in, it's not because they want to have a higher HRV as the end goal, like the eyes on the prize. And it's not because they want to have the perfect score, but because they want to show up as a better husband, a better mother, a better father, a better sister. They want to become a better human being. And all those habits over time build them up to be that person. And data helps with that. And they don't take it like it's the Bible, but it helps them stay on track and course correct if necessary.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
there was one story I wanted to share about. So we haven't talked a lot about the wearables around continuous glucose monitoring, but it is one piece of data that I find very interesting, very individualistic.
Huge.
And at some point in everybody's life, they should be wearing a CGM just to begin to understand and have the dietary awareness around how the foods they eat, the stress they're exposed to, their habits, how that impacts their blood sugar. Now, I did that for a couple of weeks, and I definitely think I need to do it more often. But as much as I didn't see too many crazy, like, I didn't have too many aha moments. But there was one moment when I had a piece of watermelon and it shut my blood sugar up to like 120
Yeah, yeah.
after a bite of the tiny watermelon. And for a long time, I didn't touch watermelon. I was like, oh my goodness, it's the devil. I can't eat watermelon. It shoots up my blood sugar, blah, 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 blah. And I changed that now. Like I have watermelon occasionally, but it's just very interesting how the next person could have a much less response to that watermelon as much as it's just literally sugar and water and some fiber. But I did change from the obsession of not of I can't have it because it shoots up my blood sugar. You know what? My blood sugar is going to be fine because it's resilient and it can bounce back to baseline healthily.
And let's live life. Okay, let's make sure and live life.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure that piece of watermelon didn't shoot us up as much as the banana split I had yesterday. Okay, um, I'm pretty sure that was probably more significant. And yes, I think the awareness and the things that we learn are really good. When you learn that sleep can contribute so much to recovery, empathy, social connection, when you learn that alcohol detracts from sleep. Period. End of story. You know what? We did our interview with Alicio, and he talked about what's it for good. And he says, and have a glass of wine, and I don't mind that, but you know what? Yeah, wine is lost on me. Okay, I just don't get it. Okay, so I'll have a lemonade. I'll have a glass of tea. I'll have something like that. I'm a coffee freak, but yes, but that and I think that's important. I don't want to minimize that. But what is moving you towards the goal of maybe good human, okay? Good dad, good husband, good partner, good worker, good leader. What's helping you get there, which is a lot like what is it to be good wrestler, good teammate, good coach. Um, I think those things, and again, this is where quantification can be very valuable. Um, so make sure to have the goal, and we go back to this. Let's go back to rocks in the jar. Okay, what are the rocks? Move more. If you don't move enough, exercise. Nutrient dense food. If you don't have nutrient dense food, get your supplements in place. Sleep. If you don't have your sleep environment hacked, get it done. Light, getting light in your eyes and on your skin at the right time of day. But these all go into the jar of purpose. What is your purpose? Okay, you've constantly got to go back and refresh that, or else the world will just kind of just drive by you, and you'll forget about who you are. And listen, you and I getting together on a weekly basis to have a good conversation helps reinforce my purpose, of helping individuals recognizing the changes necessary to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. That's my purpose. But I just got done spending almost 48 hours with my daughter. She came up to visit us. I'm spending time with my wife. What was really cool, I was talking to my counselor about a week ago, and we were talking about us being on our nomadic lifestyle. And I said, Kelly, I said, I have to tell you, I said, of 3 years of having Laura within an arm's length of me at all times, um, we have had one blow up. We've had one fight. And
That's
part of that was dumbass here realizing he was being egotistical jerk and learning to and having the empathy to understand, okay, this isn't about you, it's about them, help them out. And it's just a lot easier way to go through life, and if you've got the added resiliency to do it, it makes life a lot easier.
indeed. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap because I think
We're going
we've
to
come
wrap
to
it
the
up
end
on
of
that
it.
one.
We're understanding, yeah, data is gotta be feedback and not your identity.
Yeah.
You're not your HRV.
No.
Like seriously.
No, you can use it.
So
Yeah.
I yeah, I think there is a value. 100% there's a value. I mean, I would never refute that. Definitely a value because I use it and I've seen dozens, hundreds of people online, thousands of people use data and better their life. There's just got to be a healthy relationship with it instead of a obsession toward perfectionism and obsession toward making everything right. Like the life of a Brian Johnson is not livable. When I was talking to, interestingly, as I was talking to a person so after the UFC fight, I had a chance to go down to the octagon and tour the octagon where all the
Okay.
action just kind of happened a few minutes ago. And as we were standing in line, there was a father and son duo in front of me. And I started talking, and I had this shirt, Biohack Yourself, on me. And he was like, how do you biohack yourself? So, anyway, so we started to chat. And something he said, like biohacking, it's overrated. It's unattainable to the average person. And it's just not, it's not a it's not something that I could, or the people I work with, he was doing physical labor, I could see incorporating into my life because there's just no time. If you follow the Huberman method, I have a 3 hour, whatever morning routine. But then I'm like, hold on, biohacking is not all that. Biohacking is the simplest things. He looked like a fit dad, somebody who took care of himself. So I'm like, you gotta do some things that are considered biohacking. He's like, yeah, intermittent fast. I don't eat breakfast. I don't eat sugar. And I'm like, see, you are biohacking things that are in your control. Like you don't have to have the Huberman method. You don't have to have the Peter Attia super strict, regimens all the
Protocol.
time in order to, yeah, you don't have to have those protocols to live by. You can just be the person who works in concrete and does physical labor and at the same time keeps healthy because makes decisions to benefit their body in a way that is making them perform better in life and not going to the gas station and having a hot dog when they're
So,
hungry. So
but you know what? Those gas station hot dogs are pretty damn good sometimes. Um, but no, let's go back and look at the definition of this and what is biohacking. Contrary to what many people say, biohacking is an ancient art. Okay, I define it as modifying both your exterior and your internal environment to optimize health and performance. Okay, pretty simple. How do we do external? Red light over my shoulder, sauna here, exercise, yada yada yada. There's any number of things that we do there to modify both my internal and external environment. If this guy trains, he biohacks. This goes back to the foundation of medicine. First, do no evil, do no harm, but damn it, do something. Um, because if you don't, if it's not going well and you keep up the same thing, it's going to go that direction. It's okay. What little changes can we make? So biohacking is accessible. So much of this is about awareness. You know, listen, we're recording this on July 4th, 2025. About a week ago, there was a big thing in the press that came out that RFK Jr. wants to put wearables on everybody. Okay. And I don't think that's a good idea. Okay. Because most people aren't ready for this. Go to Walmart sometime. Okay. And just look around the people going in and out and tell me that that person that's buying a carton of cigarettes and a case of Coke that's riding the wheelchair through, or the, not the wheelchair, but the electric dolly, because they're not physically fit enough to do it. Okay. We don't need a wearable on that person. We need awareness. We need to be aware of, are they in a financial situation that they're not, maybe they don't have the ability to buy the fresh food and things like that. This is a complex issue, okay, that is deep and generational. Okay. So it's not the simplest idea, but biohacking is just making the little steps. Okay. And maybe shifting from diet to Diet Coke, from sugared Coke, that may be one of the first changes you make. Um, joining a smoke cessation program to help get the cigarettes out of your mouth. That's a huge biohack, huge health benefits. So you don't need to be a Daniel, a Huberman, or a Peter Attia and optimization. Let's just move the needle a little bit, like we talk about with the 90% Healthy podcast.
And that is so true. And on that note, we're right up 1 hour. How nice.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Don.
Can't
So
wait
many
to talk to you
cool,
again. Hey, everybody,
cool
if you
tidbits.
like what you're hearing, please follow. We want to hear from you. We have heard from a few people and we really appreciate it. But as we build up followers, please tell other people about the podcast. If you think we suck and you think there's something we can do better, send us a note. We want to hear it. You're probably wrong, but we'll take it anyway. And we'll go from there.
Indeed. Yes. Please do let us know if you have any questions, comments, notes. We would love to hear from you. So
Thanks so much,
until
everybody.
next time.
Thanks for giving us an hour of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.